Yeah.
Professor Kaz, dobro veče.
Dobro večer, Saiful. How are you?
Dobar dan.
Dobar dan.
I am odlično.
Odlično, okay. Odlično. Have you been working on the assignments, on preparing your responses related to particular lectures?
Yeah, I will submit 16th December.
Okay. So I went to the copy office to ask them to make the scanned version of the reader to escape sending it. However, I should have done something better when I did prepare that. I should have collect PDFs, but I did not do that, and now I do not have a time for that. And so, can you see the presentation, Xenia?
Yes, it's visible. It's clear.
Okay.
Can I have two questions before we start?
Please.
For the reader, I have the first one, the old one that I got 2 weeks ago. Should I change it? I will come to the faculty tomorrow for the lecture for 6 p.m. Can I change it then to the new one, or I can keep it?
You should change, because it looks so stupidly and so wrongly packed with a few. So the last steps were really unbelievably wrongly done. So I insisted.
Okay, I will come to. Should I contact you somehow, or I can ask the professor who is doing the lecture tomorrow?
I'm tomorrow. We have.
Oh, okay. Oh, we are tomorrow together. Oh, great.
I sent a power.
Yes. I forgot. Okay.
Presentation.
Great. I will be there tomorrow, so I will bring the old reader.
Yes, do it, and I will bring you the new one, the normal one.
The normal one. Okay, great. Okay, then we will.
I'm not very satisfied. I made it too big, but anyway, from the surplus, there is no harm. So
yeah, of course,
you do not need to read all articles. You also have added some others at Moodle, so you will decide.
Yeah, sure. And if I saw correctly on Moodle, we have 4 assignments for the December 20th, right?
I don't know by heart. As due to the exam instructions.
Okay.
And Anna Mehmeti did technical, for example, for Master in European Integration, Professor Miodrag does it, because for each assignment he has to technically to accommodate some parts of Moodle platform which lead students until when can submit. So she did it for, if you find any problem, because I remember that once Miodrag had to instruct Anna to do something in addition. So if there is any technical problem, please let me know in order that we amend that technical framework.
Okay,
so
thank you very much.
Anna was supposed to follow the exam instructions deadlines, and she did it. So I don't know by heart. I made exam instructions, but I do not remember. So
understood. I will check everything once again. And
yes. Nina is here, and I will give her the floor. I will leave earlier because we made an agreement in that regard. So see you tomorrow at 6 o'clock again, and I'm looking forward to that.
Yes.
So bye.
I'll be there. Bye.
Okay, nice. We always political theories. Sorry, just for a second. Just a second. Hello, everyone. We'll start soon. После полудня. Не sa USB prezentacija, tako? Let me just interrupt the presentation for a brief moment because it's been opened from the professor's flash. And she needs to take it, so we'll just copy it to the desktop and be right back. I think it actually is here. So we just had some more colleagues join us in person. So that good. We're sharing the presentation again. So let's just have this finish. Ne smijete vi ni najmanje, ali slobodno idite ako imate posle. So, last time we were somewhere with gender-based violence, right? You can see the PowerPoint, right?
We can see.
Okay, great. So we finished that one, and I think we got to this question of emancipation, and we didn't go any further, right? Or did
Right.
we didn't go to this yet? Okay. So, and I have to scroll again. Sorry. So regarding the issue of emancipation, which is right here, just a terminological note, since I've sometimes heard people think that the word emancipation has something to do with man. So I presume people who know Latin and who studied Roman law know a bit more about that. So it all has to do with the Latin manus, which is hand, arm, which symbolized various forms of legal power in ancient Rome, and emancipation in ancient Roman law, of course, had nothing to do with women, but it involved a young man being released from the familial power of his pater familias and becoming a sui juris person, able to complete various deals on his own without his father's approval. And in that sense of someone coming into their full legal capacity, the word emancipation is used for anyone who is getting rid of some past limitations or discrimination and so on. So we can use emancipation in a more narrow term in the sense that women gained rights on paper, becoming equal to men, so getting the same rights in family law, getting the suffrage, and so on and so forth. But also we can talk about emancipation in a more general, more subtle way, in the sense of overcoming various aspects of discrimination which may be present in practice, even when the law is on paper equal for men and women. At any point, as always, please ask questions, post comments. That's the best part of lectures if you're interested in anything. Now, there is a term that you might encounter in literature, and that is the feminization of poverty, which, as you can see on the screen, signifies the fact that men are more often the ones holding jobs that pay better, that who own more real estate, and so on and so forth. So they have more resources, while women typically have less. Now, that is, of course, a very normal thing in patriarchal societies, where a man is expected to be the head of family and own everything, while a woman is his wife and being cared for by the husband, who makes all the decisions and owns all the property. But the thing is that even in societies where, again, formally before the law, men and women are equal, we often find situations that either generally in that society men have better salaries, better jobs, and so on, or within a particular profession or branch of economics, we can see that men hold the positions of power, better jobs, and so on. Now you have the mention of feminization of particular professions here in the slide. So, for example, here in Serbia, we have the feminization of the judiciary. So most judges are women. I can't remember the exact percentage, but a very high percentage of judges are female. And of course, as our students know, about 2/3 of our law students are also female. So one may say, well, it is logical if the majority of lawyers are female, then of course the majority of judges who are lawyers will also be female. But that is not the same in some other legal professions. And it's also particularly indicative that when we have a look at higher tiers of that same profession, we may notice a disproportionate number of men as opposed to women there. So it is often the case, and I think we mentioned it last time, but no harm in repeating, that sometimes for a while a profession, so historically, not to that extent something that happens now, but that a certain profession is considered at first to be male, then slowly women gain access to that profession. And as more and more women migrate to that profession, it sort of starts becoming less prestigious, and the men migrate somewhere else, and then it becomes mostly female profession, and then it is paid less, held in less esteem, and so on and so forth. And the undergraduate teaching that you have listed here is a wonderful example. So, you know, of course, throughout the world in various stages, but let's say on average in the 19th century, we have the rise of public schooling, and mostly school teachers initially were male. Then gradually more and more women gain access to that profession. At first, women teach only in girls' schools, while there is still sex segregation in schools, but gradually they become teachers in schools for boys, or mixed schools become the rule, and it is defended in the sense that women can be teachers as good as men, or maybe sometimes even underlining that, say, little children could use a maternal figure, someone gentle and caring to teach them, and so on and so forth. But gradually that becomes a female profession and is not held in particularly high regard. Now, our foreign colleagues can, of course, share the experience of what it is like in their countries, but in Serbia, I think we can agree
that most primary school teachers are female, that maybe we have physical education, yes, and maybe some other subjects we have men as teachers, but the regular class teachers will be female. Now, of course, the decrease of prestige for the profession of school teacher is not related solely to the fact that it became a female-dominated profession. It is also related to the fact that the public education system became much broader. Initially, schools were few. They were regarded as something of an elite thing, so sending your child to get an education, particularly if you were from a rural area back in the day, was not something that went without saying. That was a prestigious thing. And now, as primary education is mandatory worldwide, and there are very many schools with many pupils, etc., of course, that very regular everyday profession no longer holds the esteem that it once had, while it was reserved for the children of the elite, let's put it. Not maybe the highest elite, those had private teachers, but you understand. But still, here we have a correlation between the profession losing prestige and the profession also becoming female-dominated. Again, in higher education, particularly university level, that is not the same, but it depends very much on the discipline in question. So again, on average, you will find more women in social sciences, arts, humanities than in the STEM fields. And sometimes women in a very male-dominated scholarly field may find themselves subject to some social stigma or different expectations that they have to show that they really belong in that male profession and so on. But overall, for example, here in Serbia, we don't have a problem with women as university teachers. It's a fairly normal thing. While I know that in some countries, including well-developed Western European countries, there is still a very high domination of men in the academia. I've spoken during the course of this project, by the way, as we were making LawGem, to colleagues from Germany, and there they say that absolutely there are many more male law professors than female ones, and it's hard to get a breakthrough in the profession as a woman, and so on. But again, although it's perfectly normal to have female law professors here in Serbia now, it's still valid to mention that throughout the history of the Faculty of Law, we've only had one woman as dean of the faculty, Professor Ljubica Kandic. And not only was only one woman chosen as dean, she was the only female candidate ever. So until now, no other woman has attempted to become the dean of the faculty, despite the fact that now we have, I presume, roughly 50-50 men and women in the teaching staff, maybe even a little more women. So one could ask again, why? Why, if a profession is relatively gender balanced or even female dominated to some extent, why do the higher tiers still more often remain reserved for men? Does anyone have any ideas?
What we see on the table of she was only one time candidate. So I would ask, why only one? Because other needs were elected multiple times. So was her experience not motivational for the other female professors? In a sense, was her experience being seen as a non-discrimination,
I understand.
equal as her being a male? So maybe that's also a good point to see this question, because if she was elected only once or being nominated only once, why is that? I think it's not the burden of the she's in her position, but
I understand your point. I'm not sure how much our colleagues online can hear the things from the audience. If you need something repeated at some point, feel free to say.
I think most of the
Mhm.
most of the female professors are not interested to take the responsibility of administration. That is the basic reason.
Yes. So if we had had female candidates who were not elected, we could say it's discrimination. But not a single woman except Professor Ljubica Kandic ever tried to become a dean. And yes, to an extent, it is the fact that women tend to gravitate away from jobs that involve very extended working hours and so on. It's not just even the responsibility. It's, when you're a regular professor, you have your classes during the week. You might have some sort of meeting now and then, and that's all. When you're the dean, you're more or less expected to be at the faculty all day, every day, because there's a lot of administration work to do. Every problem is directed to you. Every important occasion is, again, you are expected to be present and so on. Of course, there are vice deans to help, and we have had many women vice deans, but we haven't had more than one woman dean. And
Is it possible also that women don't get enough support from their circles, family circles, home circles, friends circles to participate in such job offers or elections, because they want for women to be at home with their kids, and how we're gonna survive without you home, and etc.
yes, I think that is precisely what colleague Saiful was also trying to say, that women want jobs like that less, regardless of whether they want them personally or they think it's their responsibility. Generally, in most societies, we have started taking for granted that both men and women work paid jobs. But we still also take for granted, or at least many people do, that women are somehow more in charge of the children and the house at home. So generally, a woman is less likely to take a job with extended working hours, with unusual working hours, and so on. Now, of course, to an extent, this has some biological basis. For example, when a couple has a very young baby that is still nursing, a mother is biologically more helpful than the father. Of course, the father could feed the baby from a bottle with formula and so on, but most experts agree that it's healthier for the baby to nurse naturally, etc., etc. But then again, if we're talking about having a small preschool or primary school aged child, is there really a significant reason why it would be more important for the mother and not the father to be more at home with the child? Now, of course, if we want to complicate things in that respect, we could talk about general difference in work and family patterns in a modern industrial society as opposed to what was there a few centuries ago. Back in the past, the entire family worked at home. People mostly tilled their own fields or produced something to sell in the shop that was also in their house, and the entire family was at home working, and the children were always with both their parents. And then comes the Industrial Revolution, and then first men are expected to go away from home to work, to earn something for a living, and then gradually women are taken into the workforce too. But as it was already expected for them to stay at home while the men work, now we still think that it's primarily the task of the wife and the mother to take care of the house and the children, and not the father. Now, as for these related terms that you have listed here, for example, single parents and so on, most legislations now do talk in a gender-neutral way of single parents, and not so much as before as single mothers. But again, look up the statistics for any country and you will see that the majority of single parents are single mothers. Now, why do you think is that?
I think it's a combination of factors. Of course, women are the ones who give birth, so they're the ones. There's also something to be said about court systems awarding the child in the court more often than women, because there is a combination of biological and social factors that contribute to that particular outcome.
Precisely. So if we have a child being born without the parents being in a stable relationship, regardless of whether they're married or not, but without the parents living together, of course, it is the mother who will have the child. Now, whether some sort of different agreement with the father can be made is a different question, but in most cases it is not. And yes, the colleague has very aptly pointed out that in divorce cases, courts are much more likely to award custody to the mother than to the father. And that is also a relatively recent development, but it is a well-established one now. So again, maybe 100 or more years ago, the situation was the other way around. So courts would have favored the father as the proper head of the family. We even had a provision in our 19th century civil code that in the case of a divorce, unless the parents come to a different agreement, female children were to stay with the mother until they were 7, and male children until they were 4. And after that age, they were to move to the father's house. It's expected that girls need their mother for a longer time, maybe due to some emotional reasons, maybe because also a mother needs to teach them female skills, housework, and so on, while a boy will need his father as the male role model from a younger age. Now, that was, of course, the legal presumption that could be challenged, that could be changed in a particular divorce case. But so then the standard was for mothers to have only temporary custody and for the fathers to be the ones to take care of the children in the long term. Now, such temporary settlements usually aren't made. That is not considered to be in the best interest of the child, and more often the courts do award custody to mothers, which again might or might not be appropriate in a particular case. Now, as for the gender pay gap, you understand what the term means, I presume. Now, in which sense it takes place in a particular setting depends a lot on the country in question. For example, here in Serbia, simply since the socialist Yugoslav times, we've had the legal equality of men and women, and the Paychecks are fairly transparent in most work environments. So it goes without saying that someone who is hired in such and such company on such and such a position gets such and such payment, regardless of that person's sex. In some countries, it is more customary for private companies to be able to strike a deal with every employee as to how much they will be paying them. So in some places, there is no rule that people doing the same job in the same company have to be paid the same. And
If I may add, I think that's one of the reasons why there's a stigma about discussing your salary.
yes,
Employers don't want you to talk about your salary because people will find out what others are being paid and ask for a higher salary themselves. I believe this topic connects to a previous conversation about women not pursuing careers which are more demanding and have more working hours. That's one of the explanations that are used. Why a gender pay gap existing in countries where it is legally, it does not exist legally, but it's in practice because women work jobs which typically pay less.
precisely. And men are more likely, for example, to stay to work overtime if it is paid extra, and so on. And also, while this does not directly contribute to the pay gap, but it can indirectly, women are more likely to take unpaid assignments at work. Again, I'm giving a university example because that's what's close to me from practice. We teaching at the faculty have the same base salary, and we have a small extra percentage paid for classes held and exams held. Nothing else is paid additionally. So if someone is organizing some extracurricular activities with students, we have some lectures, roundtables, we have people preparing students for various moot court competitions and so on. Those things are not paid additionally. So teachers take them as willing obligations because they think it's a good thing to do. Participating in, I don't know, editing the various publications, journals, and so on. Some of it is paid, but a very limited amount of positions. Mostly you get nothing beyond having your name somewhere. And once again, some statistics show that women are more likely to take such unpaid work, while men are more likely to ask, do I get anything extra out of that?
That's the thing you're talking about now is also one of the reasons why the pay gap is such to exist. Women are less likely to ask for a higher salary than men. They're less confrontational in that regard.
Yes, and they also have the lowered expectations, particularly in some environments where they know it's male dominated and the woman isn't quite seen as equal, and they think if I ask for a high salary, they might not hire me at all, and so on. And that the problem perpetuates itself that way. Now, as for the unpaid work mentioned here, beyond the one that we just mentioned, that is extra work at the place of one's employment, there is also the matter of housework to be mentioned. So, as we spoke previously in the context of children, also in the context of generally cooking, cleaning the house, and so on, it is still in many cases considered to be primarily a thing that a woman does. And many people even don't perceive it anymore. It's a woman's duty to clean the house, to cook for her man, and so on. But for example, they think, including women, that women are just better at it. You can often hear women talking like, men don't have the Yes, or they just don't care about whether they live in nice, clean conditions or not. You know, if you leave a man to live alone, it will look like a pigsty and so on. No offense to the males present here. I don't mean that as a statement of fact. I'm just saying it's something that many people believe. And well, a funny anecdote from half a century ago from a colleague of my mother's. Her husband spoke of this himself. He thought it was a good joke. She was asking him to help with the housework because they were getting older and it was harder for her to do everything on his own. He was like, well, I don't know how to wash dishes, how this. Well, could you at least bake her? Okay, I can do that, but please go away while I'm doing it. Don't get underway. And he says he'd just close himself in the room, turn the vacuum cleaner on, and do something else. So it wasn't a modern robot cleaner. He'd just turn it on and leave it in one place and read the newspaper or something. He wouldn't actually clean. And then after 15 minutes, he'd turn it off and say, oh, I'm done. Well, this is the best I can do. If it's not good enough for you, then, well, I can't help it. And she'd, oh, thank you. You see, it's better now when it's clean. And so he cheated his poor wife, and he thought it was a good joke to tell his friends.
There's that classic saying that the only word for good work is more work. So smart people know to do things improperly, so nobody would ask to do it again.
Well, yes, I know of situations like that. But again, I think in this case was just, not having to do any work in the first place. Now, of course, the situation is gradually improving in that direction. We have more and more men who find it natural to help with the house, to help with the children, sometimes even to do more than their wives. I have to admit that my husband cooks better than I do. But overall, the average is still that women tend to be in less demanding and thus jobs that are paid less, and that they bear more of the brunt of the unpaid work at home or otherwise. Now, our next term is gender awareness raising. So I presume you understand it. So the idea is that we can change some of the problems that we have spoken about in these lessons if more and more people become aware of them. So if in education or in using various other opportunities, we who have more knowledge on this subject than the average layman explain how, despite the fact that we as a society have laws where men and women are equal for the most part, there are still problems in practice that present difficulties in most cases for women, but sometimes for men as well. The divorce and child custody example is one where women are favored and that's not necessarily always justified. So generally, if more and more of the public is aware of the problem, is thinking about how to solve the problem, then we will be on the right path. So there are various terms such as gender sensitive knowledge or training, gender competent. Some people prefer sensitive because you have to be sensitive to the issue. Some people say it sounds too gentle and men perceive it as too feminine. It's better to say gender competent. That sounds professional, and so on. But generally, it is the same thing. So the idea is to see how to make more people aware of the problem and trying to do something to solve. So here we have two different perspectives, two different methods of combating inequality. Now, here we are talking from a gender perspective, but the same issue can be applied to race or any other form of discrimination. So a slightly older approach was to make the laws, policies, etc., as they say, gender blind, in the sense to make them perfectly neutral, completely ignoring the gender of the persons they are applied to. So just to talk neutrally about people, persons, parents, and so on. And it is now considered that such programs are, or at least very often can be, flawed, because if we have equality on paper, but there are problems and some form of discrimination or inequality in practice, and we just look at the paper that treats all men and women equally, we won't understand what's beneath. And thus this gender sensitive or gender competent approach is advised, so that when some sort of policy is being made, a law is being drafted and so on, that the gender factor be taken into account, that we think about, will this thing affect men and women differently? And if yes, what could we do about it? On the other hand, of course, we have gender bias or sexism, or however you wish to call it. So some people might not even be aware, but they may think that there are differences between men and women that are not biologically based, but that are, in most cases, of course, favoring men. But then again, women can also have attitudes discriminating against men, as we mentioned in the cleanliness example previously. But, you have various stereotypes, such as, saying men are better drivers, or women aren't suited for command positions, it takes a firm hand, or maybe men aren't suited to working with little children, they are not sensitive enough, etc., etc. So, as always, many of these issues are obvious, but many of them are not. Some are quite sensitive. So, when we are faced with an opinion, a factor, someone thinking that there is a difference between men and women in some respect, if that is not clearly a biological, physical difference, then we have to think about, why do we think, or why does some person think that that difference exists? To which extent is it really something based on the different biology of men and women? And to what extent is that, in fact, not a sex but a gender difference, so something that is just based on societal norms, on expectations, and so on. I'll give you a historical example of a lose-lose situation for women. In the United States, when women first gained access to practicing law, so not just for studying and getting a legal degree, but becoming practicing solicitors. It happened at various times in various states in the USA, but generally many of those women reported problems with their choice of clothing affecting their clients' attitudes. And in some cases, it was if they dressed in typical female clothing for the era, very feminine at the time, their clients would think they don't look quite professional, they look weak. Will this person be able to fight for my rights in court, and so on? While on the other hand, if they dressed in suits and tried to look as much as their male colleagues did, they'd often get comments that they look unfeminine, that it looks unelegant, that they look like they're cross-dressing, that it's inappropriate, and a woman should not dress that way, and so on. So such a simple, irrelevant matter, what your lawyer is wearing, actually sometimes led to losses of clients just because a certain client thought a female lawyer should wear a dress or should wear a pair of trousers. Now things get more complicated and potentially with more difficult consequences when those gender stereotypes and prejudice enter the courtroom. So again, this can apply to race and other factors as well. But simply, judges are humans as well. They may have their own opinions, they may have their own prejudices and stereotypes, and they may not be trying to favor, say, one side because of their sex or to discriminate against an individual, but they might simply have an opinion that such and such person is obviously suited or obviously unsuited for some role, which is essentially based on that person's sex. So once again, as with any form of prejudice, it is important that the judge in any case takes all factors into account, that they second guess, am I really thinking this because of my impression of this individual as a person? For example, in the child custody case, let's not make always women the victims. Am I really thinking that this particular father is not as suited for taking care of the child as this particular mother? Or am I just generally thinking children are better off with their mothers? This is again something related to the gender blindness method that we were talking about before. So most legislation today, generally, at least in the Western world, but I presume beyond as well, is gender neutral. So in most cases, laws just talk of people, of persons, of whoever does this, then such and such consequence follows, which of course is perfectly legitimate for many situations, but for some it is not. And then again, of course, there are some issues that very much have to do with sex biologically, where there is great debate as to whether the legislator's approach should be gender neutral or not. For example, in family law, should we talk about the rights and duties of parents absolutely equally? Or should we make some differences between mothers and fathers? For example, when we're talking about parental leave due to the birth and taking care of the young child, should that be absolutely equal, and then the family will see whether the mother or the father will take the leave to take care of the children? Or should there, for example, always be a mandatory, at least short leave for the mother because she is the one who has given birth and she needs to recover from that and she needs to be nursing the baby and so on. And then afterwards, maybe the father could take over and so on. Or, for example, in criminal law, many laws today have rape and other sex offenses regulated in a completely gender neutral way. So in the Serbian criminal code, you see that, whoever forces another to a sexual act shall be punished, etc. So either the perpetrator or the victim can be of any sex. On the other hand, you know that traditionally in older laws, rape was always prescribed as a crime that a man commits to a female victim. Then gradually some legislations accepted that, okay, a man could also rape another man, but some legislations still treat it differently. In England, for example, to this day, you have two different norms, and it's more severe to rape a woman than to rape a man.
Also, there's a difference for consent regarding is it penetration.
Yes. Yes. What is considered a sexual act, what sort of consent is needed, and so on. And in many countries, the legislation is still such that at least the perpetrator of the offense has to be male, so that they don't accept that a woman could rape a man, for example. Now, again, it depends on the definition, for example, because if we mean only physical assault, that is harder. If the definition of rape is broad enough to include, for example, coercion, manipulation, if you don't sleep with me, I'll do this and that, then of course some sort of blackmailing like that could easily be done by a woman to a man, and so on.
Like in our...
Yes. So in some laws, like in ours, it's one thing if force is used, and it's a different type of offense if someone is just blackmailed into the sexual act. So once again, we are not here to say that absolutely all laws should or shouldn't be gender neutral in all respects. So in some cases, it would be obviously discriminatory to set different rules for men and women, while in some cases we see that the biological difference clearly exists. But in some cases, it's a sensitive issue. Some people think one way, some people have a different opinion, and of course, every legislator should try to assess the factors in their society the best they can. So here we have this issue of gender-sensitive scrutiny in lawmaking, which is something that we have previously mentioned, and you have some quotes here from a book or a publication that deals with that issue, particularly in parliaments, so in lawmaking in its narrowest sense. So the idea is that generally, even when it's not such an obvious case as in parents or sex offenses that we have just mentioned, legislators should consider how such and such regulations will affect men and women. Will there be any gender differences, or is it really a completely neutral match? For example, something that is being taken into account in some countries, particularly Nordic countries in recent years, and that has surprised many people, is the effect of regulations and plans for public transport based on gender. And, people could say, well, what does sex and gender have to do with, going on a bus? We'd understand if you're talking about people with disabilities. So, when can the bus accommodate a wheelchair user? Are there traffic lights with signs for blind people and so on? But what does it matter whether you're a man or a woman when you're riding on a bus? If you're pregnant, okay. The stroller, yes. So Mhm. So women are more likely to be taking younger children along.
I think there have been studies, I don't know if it changed, but I don't think so, that women use public transportation more. Main user of public transportation is a woman.
Precisely. That can also be due to the economic gap that we've mentioned, but it can also be just, a decision on the level of the family. If the family owns only one car, it's more frequent that the husband will be the one using it while the woman will use public transport.
Stereotype that all women are bad drivers. So
It's connected, yes. It's possible that the husband is the only one with the driver's license, but it's also possible that they both can drive, but it's the husband who takes the car to work because it's deemed more practical or more important for some reason, which may or may not be justified in a particular case. And also, what also studies show is that women make more trips than men. More stops, more things to do along the way. Because, in the average family, in the morning, the man will go to work, whether he's taking a bus or driving his car, irrelevant, and then he will come back straight home from work. While the woman will take the children to school or kindergarten, then go to work, then on the way, go do some shopping, pick up the children, and then come back home. So it's the same family. Maybe they both have cars. Maybe they don't own a single car and they both use public transport, but the roles will be different. There are also some things that are very important for lawmakers to take account, and that is the regulations, the safety measures and practicality measures that are taken in the production of certain products. Now, you could say that a user's sex is completely irrelevant when using an everyday piece of technology. So, ladies, how many of you have a smartphone that fits comfortably into your hand?
yeah, I think that's it.
Unless someone has an older iPhone here or something like that. Mine is over there now, but we usually all have huge phones that don't comfortably fit in the average female hand. Now, of course, yes, there are bigger women with bigger hands, there are men with small hands. It's not a rule, but on the average, men have bigger hands than women, and women will have more problem gripping that big phone, particularly if you're trying to type with one hand, or gripping a big computer mouse or something like that. Now you could say, okay, it's a minor inconvenience. There's no reason for the legislation to get into that issue. It's just a matter of what the manufacturers think they will sell. Maybe a manufacturer will put out a new line of smaller phones and will advertise them as little lady phones, and lots of girls will buy them, also make them in pink, and so on and so forth. But it is also, for example, a health issue. If you spread your hand too much for multiple hours during the day, you will get pain, you will get problems with your tendons that you just wouldn't get if your device was smaller, for example. But let's go to something that's more of a health issue. Cars. Seatbelts. Seatbelts are usually made for the average man. And safety tests with seatbelts and with airbags in those cars that have them are also usually conducted on dummies shaped as the average adult man.
A study actually that involved the female.
Precisely.
After how many years?
And that can literally save or not save someone's life in a traffic accident. And of course, the fact that there was a first test with a female dummy is excellent, but that doesn't mean that there is legislation demanding car manufacturers have such tests yet. So essentially, if you are a woman in a car, you are less safe, not because you're a bad driver, but because the safety of the car was not tested to accommodate for female physiology.
Right, I believe there's a similar issue with drug trials.
Precisely, I was going to say that. So drug trials are very, very often conducted on men only, or on a disproportionately larger amount of male test subjects than female ones, and very often the sex of the subject isn't even indicated. So in the data, you will see that it was tested on so many hundred or even 1,000 people in larger trials. Sometimes you will see their age, some other relevant health factors, but you will not see their sex. And someone who doesn't know medicine very well might say, well, okay, unless it's a specifically, say, gynecological issue where obviously they won't test it on men, what does it matter if it's a medicine for your heart or for a cold or for whatever? Isn't it the same? Well, the thing is, it isn't, because we have different hormonal levels in our bodies. We have different body mass indexes, different proportions, and in some cases, it can make a large difference. There have been documented cases, again, mostly in Western Europe, where some drugs have had their license revoked after a while because too many negative side effects have been shown after the drug was already put on the market, but the negative side effects were present disproportionately in women, and the drugs were tested on men.
There was recently also a result of the research that 8 hours of sleep that was also all doctors were saying 8 hours of sleep enough is also based on men research experience biology and women need more than our sleep a day.
And also the AP in hotels or conferences is set for a man, and so that's why we are all premium. And that's really interesting. Why?
I was last week in the Novi Plaza, and it was so clear to me that the room was designed by a man, because the mirror in front of the
Was up here.
huge bathroom, which is mirror to brush your teeth, and also what I didn't just see my forehead. Like, okay.
Yes. Now, of course, we're talking averages always. There can be tall women who don't have a problem with that. There can be very short men who don't see that mirror at all. But on the average, if you're making it for the average customer, count on the fact that there's a 50-50 chance of the customer being female.
We have also in our office, we have a colleague that has a rare disease, and she is, I'm not going to say it, a short. So she was meant to come to Novi Pazar, and she has a problem with her car, so she didn't make it. But I was thinking of her, like, okay, she wouldn't be able to see herself in this room at all in the morning or during the day.
And that is also an important question of diversity, of including possibilities for various disabled people, minorities, etc. But what is so at first sight baffling when we're talking about sex differences here is that here we are not talking about some rare minority. So, how many really short people stay at that hotel? Probably not very many. But how many women stay there? Well, even if not 50%, then there must be a decent percent of women being there. And that could be an argument for some people, particularly more economically liberally minded ones, to say, well, again, unless it's a major health hazard and so on, this is not something for a legislator to solve. It's a free market. If women want products that suit them better, let's have someone make them. There's a big market of female consumers that will buy a particular thing that suits them better than the existing. But why do you think that's mostly not happening? So why don't we have cars tested for women? Why don't we have drugs tested for women? Why don't we have nice, comfortable little smartphones and computer mice and so on?
It's additional expense for the, not the drug trials, but for specific example. But I think it's just ignorance, to be honest. I think that people are just ignorant of that because we are having cars what 100 years or more. So and that's it. So why now?
Because the companies are men represented and there's no woman to tell them you have on a girl or you have a little mirror that might be higher so I can see myself. So there is no woman voice to say, hey, you can do that.
And also, there is, even if we talk about general consumers, there is the issue of women being used to something.
Yeah.
So, we're just used to the fact that they're making mobile phones bigger now.
Yeah.
Well, yes, we can now watch movies on the screen, so it's convenient to have it a little bigger.
But also, when they make it for women, let's say razors, which are not.
Yes. It's more expensive because they market it as a special product.
If you buy a smartphone that is more expensive and more comfortable than my hands, and I don't have that much money, I would use the less expensive one, even though it makes my bigger.
Precisely. So they would have to sell them at the same price, and it would cost them extra to make it. But what you mentioned with the razors, it's just a marketing trick. So it does not cost the Gillette or anyone more to make a razor that's pink as opposed to one that's blue, because that's literally the only difference that they make there.
Also the women razors are not the blue.
Yeah.
One, yes. So sometimes it's just marketing and companies trying to make more money or to save up by not making a separate model. And sometimes they may actually be ignorant of the fact that there are differences between their consumers, and maybe women would appreciate a different product. Which, again, with all the marketing research conducting nowadays, means that nobody is bothering to ask the questions of 50% of their consumers. What's also very important for safety, various protective equipment that police officers, soldiers, firemen, and so on use. So, for example, the bulletproof vests, they are designed for men. Very, very few police forces have specific bulletproof vests in the shape of a female body. And, the female officers just to slap on the one that suits them best and hope they don't get shot somewhere in the gap.
For the firefighters, the very heavy. Their neighbors are really heavy, unnecessarily heavy, and that's why it's more motivational enough for.
Yeah. Now, of course, certain types of equipment have to have a certain weight to accomplish a certain goal, but again, agreed. So I think we gave a lot of examples, and you understand that there are many things that can be taken into account. If you think of anything else, feel free to say it, including our online participants. Sometimes we think that, well, there are just some very specific female and male products, like of course there's clothes, there's some hygiene stuff and so on, and everything else is neutral, while in fact so many things are not, particularly if we look into little details. And another example just that I thought of to correct some discrimination against men, you know how it is often joked that, you know, a woman might have a high fever, but she will still be working, cooking, taking care of the children, while a man has a mild fever and, oh, he's in bed and he's dying. Well, actually, research has been conducted that shows that there is something in the male physiology that makes it harder for them to suffer through moderately increased temperatures. So it's not that men are wimps, it is precisely a physiological difference.
I point out the rarely thing that happens, but it happens that very often trend drivers are women. And I was so curious to find out, were there any provisions or maybe some laws that and you need to have, yeah, maybe, I don't know, but it's very specific, not buses, not any other provisions of trends.
I presume because it's easier, because on a track vehicle you don't have as much work to do as on a regular wheeled road vehicle. But yes, and I think it's an older thing, because now this is fiction, but again, in this respect, fiction mimics reality. If you've read the Master and Margarita, Bulgakov's novel, then you know that Berlioz is killed by a tram driven by a woman, and you know when it's prophesized, well, you will die today, how will I die, your head will be cut off, and by a woman, and he thinks it's ridiculous, but then he falls under a tram that is driven by a female, so that that was not what I meant. But obviously, presumably it was easier for women to get into that, because it was easier to say, well, even though she's a woman, you know, she doesn't have much steering to do there. What harm can she do, and so on. I presume. I don't know for a fact, but it is an interesting observation. While, if I may ask a different question, why are very few truck drivers women?
Because of the life.
Yes. Yes, because it's mostly a job where you are out of the home for days on end, you sleep in the truck and so on.
But there is a specific term for a wife. It's a wife widow, because you are
married, but he's always away.
Yes.
So, there are some more key questions here from the book that we had on the previous slide. So again, what parliamentarians, so members of parliament, deputies, what can they do when they are questioning whether a law or a policy is good and whether it is gender neutral, screwy, and so on? And here are the questions that Jutta Pilainen suggests. We've more or less covered it, but let's just see those questions. So whether the law, policy, program, budget, etc., is it affecting or likely to affect women and men in different ways? Was gender a consideration when they were making it? So was it made by a men-only committee who didn't even think about it, or did they already make some deliberations? And a particular specific question, not just whether it's likely to affect them in different ways, but is it likely to enhance or to reduce the equality, the non-discrimination between men and women, and if the result is negative, can something be done about it? Now, this title may sound like something that goes without saying, human rights of women and girls. Well, women and girls are human, so of course they have human rights. But perhaps you know the bit of information that when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was passed, the term human was actually pushed in there by Eleanor Roosevelt, because previously in law and political theory, people were talking about the rights of men. And now, yes, we know that in the English language and some other languages, the word man can be taken both to mean a male and to mean man as human in general. And some people interpreted the rights of men in a general human way, but some people did not. You know, when the US Constitution in the 18th century talks about the rights of men, of course, when talking about political rights and so on, it only means males. Even in the 20th century, when the Declaration was passed, many countries perceived that to mean only males, particularly multiple Middle Eastern countries were opposed to this idea of human rights. They thought the rights of men was a better term. So it is important that the word human rights was the one that was introduced. Now, of course, translations in various languages may vary. In Serbian, we also have ljudska prava, which denotes the more general human idea, as in English. But the idea behind this underlining the human rights of women is so that basic thing on the one hand, that human rights, however they may be called in a particular language, whatever the term may be, apply equally to men and women, but also that we need to pay attention to the fact that there should be gender equality in the application of those norms of human rights, and that again, some things are more easily applied to men and women equally, while for some things, some special considerations are in order. So, for example, in the examples here that Professor Dragica has put, she mentions reproductive rights, sexual rights. So naturally, when talking about reproductive rights, we have to take into account the biological difference between men and women. So it is not the same whether it's a man who has conceived a child with a woman, or whether it's a woman who is carrying that child inside her body, who needs to carry the pregnancy, who bears the risk of something going wrong, not just for the child, but also for her. Of course, medicine has advanced wonderfully in recent years, and childbirth mortality is way lower than it used to be back in the day, but still, even in perfect conditions, childbirth is technically a risk to life, even if the risk is very small. So all that needs to be taken into account. But again, we can look at things from a different perspective too. We can say that, well, if parents are interested in the well-being of their unborn child, is it fair that, for example, if a father wishes a child and the mother, the pregnant woman, does not, is it fair that she has the right to an abortion unilaterally? What if the father would be willing to raise the child on his own? Is it all right to force that woman to carry the pregnancy in order to give the child to the father after? So that is a very sensitive issue. I'm not saying anything one way or the other. You may have opinions of your own, but generally that is something where it can be a small case for the law on a global scale, but someone's life could be changed for better or for worse.
But the problem with those rights, the people who are deciding what the rights are going to be given to women in any condition are mostly women. So the power dynamic there is
That is true, and that is again due to the fact that historically men have been in charge for centuries, if not for thousands of years, and women have seriously been in the decision-making process only recently. Now, yes, of course, there were always exceptions. We had ruling queens in ancient Egypt and so on, but those were exceptions on a global scale. And once again, it's not just even about the amount of women in politics nowadays, though in many countries, again, there's more men and women actively there, but it's also about how the women are behaving. Are they, in fact, when they enter politics, when they enter, say, a parliament, are they trying to look at things through this gender lens? Are they trying to bring their fresh female perspective, or are they in fact copying the behavior patterns of their male colleagues? Because it is often when someone, a member of an outlying group, gains access to something, they emulate the behavior of those who are already there. So, women entering politics, particularly somewhere where it's still a relatively new thing and there are few women there, try to behave as much as their male colleagues do in order to be taken for serious politicians. Now, this notion of gender mainstreaming again means bringing these gender issues into the mainstream discourse. So in various ways, bringing the knowledge of various problems, discrimination, differences, all these things that we've been talking about. On the one hand, in education on various levels, so be it general school education that all children go through, or be it a special professional education. So what does, in our case, a lawyer need to know in order to address these issues better in their career, in order not to perpetuate some harmful stereotypes and so on. And on the other hand, on that policy making level, so when laws are passed, when various plans, budgets, and so on are being made, that female professionals are consulted, that not necessarily females, but people who know enough about those gender differences and problems in practice see how to overcome those problems and so on. Now, there are different measures that are being suggested for so-called gender empowerment. Let me just check whether, yes, we have another slide there. Not just for the raising of awareness, but also for making sure that appropriate participation is there, that experts of both sexes exist in certain fields of work, and so on. So one of the more obvious things here is the idea of getting a certain, as they usually call it, gender balance, or a minimum percentage of, as for example, our laws say, of the less represented gender, which in most professions is usually female, but does not necessarily have to be. And there are there's also the issue, we have it here on this other side, of gender quotas. So, for example, that a certain percentage of members of parliament or of a certain committee and so on have to be persons of the less represented sex. Now, there are two issues to think of there. First, the whole idea of minimum percentages, quotas, and so on is not always viewed as a positive thing. So it has its ups and downs. So on the one hand, people say, well, even if now there are no formal obstacles to women, for example, becoming members of parliament, if we don't stimulate them, they will enter very slowly. Both the women themselves won't be stimulated to go actively into politics because they're not used to that sphere being available to them, that sphere being interesting to them. But also the political parties, which traditionally, again, have been founded and operated by men for centuries, won't be so keen on accepting female members, and particularly on putting those female members into prominent positions, unless the law forces them by saying, for example, at least 40% of people on your party list for the parliament have to be women. On the other hand, some people say, but then it undermines the concept of merit. Then if we have a minimum gender quota, then some people will make it to the list just because they are women, even if they are not too good for the job, particularly if there aren't many women in that field, in that political party, and so on, while there might be men who were better for the job in that particular case, who were passed by because of the minimal gender quota. So I don't know, what do you think about this issue?
I have one anecdote that my faculty, we had a panel discussion with various female politicians, and one of them, she was also representing a minority political party, and if there was a 30% quota for her list, and she was put to second. She wasn't put in the third place. People from the party, they just couldn't imagine how can we, because she was going to be the third, and then the sixth, and then the ninth, and there was going to be a 30% deviation, but she was put the second. And that really shows how actually general public see these things, not checking the box, but yeah, for me it was really demotivating.
I understand.
Because she didn't see a problem with that situation. It was seen as a fun one, but it really wasn't, because people are being shot. One woman is put in the second and on the third list just to check the box. Do you really want woman there?
Absolutely.
So I think it has it's a good thing, but not as an only I would say, requirement, not the only way to get the gender perspective into parliament or the party or the etc. Because I know there's a lot of now we have a lot of gender aware parties in parliament, but even if you look a little bit closely, you can see that only women, for example, are dealing with women issues of violence and rape in criminal court, and that is now in the topic. And on that kind of conferences by such parties, you don't see male representation at the table. So it can't be the only requirement, not requirement, but also measurement for gender equality.
But also, do we really live in a country where we don't have 40% women who are capable enough? I mean, I know many who are capable enough.
Absolutely.
It's really great to say, what about merit? Because merit is there. Okay, with our
In this concrete example, yes, of course. And that's the other side of the medal. You can also say that some women could find it insulting to be put in there on the basis of a gender quota and not on the basis of their merit. For example, this is a different thing. This is a racial thing, but it's an ongoing debate in the United States and Canada today, but particularly in the United States, where many universities now have a racial quota for their scholarships and for the positions at the university. So they have to admit a certain percentage of persons of color.
Right. I remember there being a lawsuit by Asian students of Harvard where they complained that they needed to perform much better than both white and black students to be admitted, and that this was discrimination. Precisely. So it's a very sensitive issue. So, for example, the people who conceived those measures, they thought, well, sometimes, particularly on those prestigious universities where they interview every candidate, where it's not just, you do a test and based on the points, where they do assessments for each spot, well, maybe there is bias and the teaching staff are biased towards white candidates. This will make them accept a certain number of persons of color. And also those people often live in conditions where they don't have the ideal working environment, where they don't have access to the same levels of school education and so on. And so this could be seen as a measure to push them up a bit, even if they couldn't enter on the basis of their school success alone and so on. But then again, there are also people who say, well, I find it insulting. For example, I am black and I entered that university before those measures and I managed to do it on merit alone. And now it's insulting to me to say that someone of my race needs to be accepted, even if they're bad at it, just because we need black people in there. Right, there's something that happened here in our area, in Yugoslavia, was cases of malicious compliance. People would be selected who were the least qualified possible for these positions. So it would reinforce the stereotype and belief that this group of people was incapable. And it would have a counterproductive effect. So this is a very complicated issue that really needs a lot of different measures to solve.
Yes, and also I know that a lot of feminist organizations were held a lot of trainings for political parties that are in the parliament on gender topics and how to, not just how to behave with female colleagues, but also how to, as a whole, deal with gender issues in the country, in a local level, and also in in the party. And I know a lot of feminist organizations didn't want to work with Serbian Progressive Party, but I didn't think that was good because it's a biggest party in the country. They're there. They have a lot of women in the party, and I think no training at all and how to use the force of women within their propaganda, within their work. And they didn't work at all. And when I sat down and talked with one, she wasn't a minister in that time, but she was a minister of local governance. And she was also in the parliament, and she was the first woman ever, first woman in the, I don't know, I think Minister of Interior Affairs, and she was the president of the women's group within the parliament, and she was represented in this important women for women within the ministry, a lot of ministers, because she did a lot, and within the parliament. And I asked her a question: how is she, as the first woman, all dealing with gender-based violence within the parliament? Because you have discriminatory talk to women within the parliament, you have hate speech, women between women and men to the parliament, and she was very offended by it. And how did she respond? Yes, and how did she respond to gender-based violence within her party, youth case and everything? And she was very offended by the question. She didn't answer me. Of course, at the end, she just said, I think women are very important. All, and that is a dialogue between, not even civil society, but women to women. And they really felt like I would have a better conversation about gender equality with both Kobradovic or with someone from the Progressive Party, a male person. So even if you have women within parliament, it's the feminist approaches that are.
Yeah. Well, that's also often the question of people working along party lines. So if a particular party tells its members to emphasize or not to emphasize something, then maybe in some cases, even if, say, in a private conversation, they might have an opinion on that subject, but they don't want to say anything in public to someone outside the party and so on that does not go along those party lines. And that's a general problem of party politics also, when we're voting on some law, how many people are voting because they genuinely think it's a good law, and how many people are voting just because, the party leader said, oh, we're going to support this, or we're not going to support that. But that's a different question of whether a better form of government can be found in party representative democracy, and because again, it turns into a situation where we formally have democracy, but it's really about who has the money to organize the party and electorate campaign and so on. So it's very, very rarely that a small party with a good idea makes a big breakthrough without a lot of money being involved there. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention regarding these gender quotas, there was a case recently, last year, I think, at our faculty, at our professor council, Nacional Promete. Now, the current law says that when questions that are of particular interest to students are being discussed, a certain percentage of representatives of students has to be there. It's 20%, but then again, it's a very new thing. Not everyone agrees whether it's a good thing or not, but it's the law currently, and there are some students that come to the council when we're discussing some issues. And there is also a gender quota in that provision. So of those students, I think 30 or 40% have to be of the less represented sex. And one of our professors actually questioned when that group of students first came because they did not have the required quota, and then they had to go away, and we had to leave that for the next session till they choose an appropriate quota of representatives. But you see, the thing is, as we've already mentioned, about 2/3 of our students are female. So in the general student population, men are the less represented sex. If those student representatives that came to that meeting, of I think 19 of them, maybe 2 were female, all the rest were male. So which is the less represented sex? Is it less represented in the student population as a whole, or less represented in that particular number of students?
But that particular.
Well, that's how we did interpret it. But
still, the 2 of them, even if we like see the less represented sex that it's male, the 2 of them, it's not.
Well, yes, yes. But since it should be at least 40% of the less represented sex. So if we say the less represented sex is male, and almost all of them are of the less represented sex, is that a problem? So
yeah, but no, it's very easy.
It's interesting. Yeah. So,
but still, it needs to be 46.
Yeah, but it's at least, that's the thing. So if we take male as the less represented sex,
right,
then
it could be 100%.
It could be 100%, yes, theoretically, when it's formulated as at least, yes.
Mm-hmm. That's the issue with the less represented.
That's the issue with the less represented. And that's the issue with the at least. Mm-hmm. But of course, most of those quotas are at least to a minimum of, because it's hard to get it precise, particularly if larger numbers are involved. But then again, it's also a frequent thing that particularly our students will know, that although most our students are female, almost all the representatives in various student associations, particularly those important ones like the student parliament, student vice dean, and so on, almost all of them are men. Mm-hmm. So again, is it because girls pick those options less often because they just want to focus on their studies? Or is it because they are not wanted in those environments because they face discrimination by their male colleagues? So it is also a question to be considered.
Well, if they didn't see a problem with going with only 2 male colleagues, you think it's better?
Then the one.
Yes.
Yes. Now, since I have this presentation on, I don't see the time. Could someone tell me what time? Okay. Since we have already finished the presentation, maybe we could just, discuss a few more things and then wrap it up before the formal end, if it's all right with you. So I don't have any more new terms for you. Do you have any more questions based on what we've been talking about today and last time? Do you have any more interesting cases to bring up?
I asked on the previous lecture of different the legal legal theory, and I asked Professor Page, and we didn't come to an answer. How many male and female professors are on faculty, but also how many male and female assistants or demonstrators are in the faculty. And I think the only way to find out who the type is to count.
To count, yes. So I don't know by heart either. There is a statistic It's a publication by Professor Dragica and a few other teachers a few years back. It's on our website, but it's, I don't know, less than 10 years, but some years old. So there is a statistic for the state at that point. So generally, I think, as my rough impression, we are overall more or less equally represented if you look at the whole teaching collective. But generally in the older generation, there are some more men, while in the youngest generation, there are some more women. But on the average, it's kind of it.
Because we talked about that phenomenon that the judiciary, women are represented in the judiciary very well, but not in from attorneys. Attorneys nowadays are often men, and women are practice family law and that kind of topic. So if we have often more female students in the faculty, where do the female students go after they graduate? And do they go and stay home because what usually do, or do they go to the judiciary and or at the less paid legal workplaces in some big firms to be just legal advisors?
Yes, well, judiciary firms, but also as clerks in the public administration, because, you know, a steady state job is something that's considered a good thing. And also many notaries are women, because that's also an office job with fixed working hours. There are no complicated cases that you need to prepare for every night with 2 liters of coffee. You just, you know, do some wills, some contracts, and so on at 4 or 5 o'clock, whatever your working hours are, you go home and that's it. While as an attorney, particularly in difficult cases, your working hours don't matter. You have to work all night and all day in order to be prepared for the trial properly. And again, as we said previously, women pick such professions less often because they want to devote time to their family and so on. Which, by the way, I don't necessarily see as a bad thing. I think more men should reason that way too. A good family needs both husband and wife at home most of the time. But generally, on average, we see men taking those long working hours but better paid jobs more often than women do. And that's the current state of things. But generally at the faculty, I think the teachers are more or less equally represented. In the administrative staff, we had a bit more women. And particularly if you include the general non-teaching staff, so, you know, the cleaning people are mostly cleaning ladies and so on, just the security people are men. It's mostly women in the library, but there are some men too. And so. And practically every dean for years back has at least one female vice dean, but we're still waiting for the second female dean. So. Does anyone else have any questions, ideas? Do you maybe have any personal experience in your studies and your jobs? Those of you who work, have you been witness or subject to any form of discrimination that you feel comfortable sharing, of course?
Yeah.
I had one. I work for Belgrade Prime, and that's more of a kind of for sure. I don't think I don't think it was in such a situation, but we were a couple for a year prior, whatever, and we were part of the panel discussions. We are there for all men, and my boss had not been all men, so I was talking. And I always keep on the because that was a platform for me to going to say one day, whatever, or to decide for them to be seen only as a male. So that's also with, when you are all alone in a male space, should you take a platform?
Yeah, I understand.
If it's taken be like something or not. So, it was not that good thing.
I understand.
Carry on.
Yeah, I did a lot of research regarding offensive violence, and when we talked about jobs, male jobs, female jobs, and the reason I really think from all the research about the topic, not just family discrimination before, but one of the reasons of the such all the habits within the obstetric medicine is because the first doctor in that field was made to put the women to lie down, and that is not the natural birth. And because of that, women cannot deliver a baby as fast as practical as the hospital staff might want. And so that's why a lot of mechanisms are very inclusive. The jumping from the stomach, the episiotomic measures, and a lot of it is outdated even, and it's not prohibited and prohibited in a lot of countries, but very outdated because it's just allows a faster baby labor and it's easier for the staff, but it's not natural and it's not normal. And we then researched countries in Europe, and now the practice is what position is now natural for you to be standing on. They ask you, and what position do you want to be in right now? So they ask that our no.
But I think some of them have those chairs that are like gynecological chairs, so that can be tilted up if you want to be in a more of a sitting position, so something between a chair and a bed. But some still have that.
So it's very clear why it's happening.
Well, that's also a complex issue because, back in the day before formal medicine, childbirth was usually supervised by midwives who were women, but who had no formal education, who just, were apprenticed to some previous midwives and learned through experience. And of course, sometimes they knew wonderful things and sometimes they just held to some superstitions that weren't really medically sound. And then when the educated doctors came, they had prejudice towards all those midwives, not just because they were women, but because they were uneducated. I finished medical school, I've been studying for years, and now you who maybe don't even know how to read and write, now you want to tell me something. But generally, those women also had some knowledge that was gained through practice, through maybe trial and error. And nowadays, in some countries, the profession of a midwife is again becoming acceptable and institutionalized. So there's something like nurses that help with childbirth and so on.
Stigma of childbirth at home.
Yeah.
And with the parts that work. I mean, reasonable sometimes.
And again, you know, if it's a normal childbirth and nothing goes wrong, yes, you're more comfortable at home and so on. But then again, if something goes wrong, your life or the baby's life could depend on the doctor being there on time. And you know, if you live across the street from the hospital, okay. But if you live in some small village far away, someone might die because of that. So
Yeah, there is a lot of understanding of nowadays the pregnancy is not a normal state of a woman, but it's normal, and so you second stage.
Yes.
So that's why you don't have to. You don't need to do anything. You can't do anything. You have to lay down. You have to, and that all is in a normal circumstances when the baby is healthy and everything. You to go why should be.
No, but there are again many stereotypes that science is slowly proving or disproving. You know, just as back in the day, well, I don't know, maybe we're all relatively young here, but back when our mothers were giving birth to us, it was normal, particularly for older people, to say to a pregnant woman, you have to eat a lot, you have to eat for 2 people now. And it was very expected for a pregnant woman to gain weight, not just because of the baby, but to get fat because she's eating for 2 people. While nowadays, of course, they don't recommend to eat that much. Yes, a little more, particularly in the last trimester, but not as if you were eating for 2 adults. Mm-hmm. Saiful, what did you want to say? You're just muted.
Professor Ka, dobro bache. I have a personal opinion regarding discrimination.
Okay.
My opinion is that female discrimination for themselves because they never try to protect the discrimination. They always try to be adjust with the discrimination. That is the main reason of discrimination about them. Because if they protect discrimination, then no one can harass them. Discrimination will be lower and lower gradually. But most of the cases, women are not protected. Try to protect the discrimination. They try to.
I'm sorry, I'll have to interrupt you. We don't hear you quite clearly, and then I don't get your point completely. Could you try speaking more clearly, or I don't know how far you are from your microphone.
Sorry for my response. I want to say that discrimination of female it's a problem created by the female itself. Female woman itself create that discrimination by themselves because they never protect about discrimination. They try to adjust or adapt with the discrimination. They try to adapt with the situation, never protect. That is the reason behind discrimination is increasing day by day about female. That is my opinion.
Okay, if I understood what you said, and you'll correct me if not, so you're saying that women often just accept a situation, they don't fight against discrimination as such, and then they just try to, okay, yes, that is a frequent case, and there are various aspects to it. On the one hand, women and people in general could be just used to something, people say, well, that's the way it is, you can't change it, that's how the world works, and so on. And then they just accept that, well, when you are a woman in politics, for example, you have to behave like the men do in order for them to accept you as one of the boys. And if you draw too much attention to the fact that you're a woman, then they'll think you're not competent and so on. Not necessarily just in politics, but in some male-dominated professions, for example. Or in some family situations, it could be just, that's the custom, that's how people do it, and so on. I know of a few examples there. So, for example, you know how in very many countries back in the day, succession laws were such that either male children had precedence, or male children got more of the inheritance, or, for example, it was the males who got the real estate, the land, and the houses, while female children just got some movable things and money that they could take as dowry and so on. And then gradually it was changed, and men and women were made equal before the law in that respect. But it was also for a long time still customary for families to perpetuate the old inheritance customs. And for example, if a man died and he had a son and a daughter, and according to the law, they should take 50% each of his inheritance. But then the daughter would come into the court and say that she renounces her share in favor of her brother. Now, sometimes that was honestly motivated. Sometimes they, in fact, have a deal behind the closed doors, so to speak, that, okay, she'll renounce her share officially, so he gets all the land, but he will, in fact, pay her. But sometimes no payment is made, and sometimes that woman does not want to do it, but the family pressures her into it. And sometimes it's women who perpetuate that. That's what some people call, Professor Dagitsa really likes that term, perpetuating the patriarchal matrix. So again, women are used to something being a certain way, and they even discriminate against other women when they are in a better position. For example, she's already a married woman and she has sons and she's well respected that way, and now some young unmarried woman comes with some non-traditional proposal, and instead of helping her, she denounces her or condemns her, gossips, and so on, like that woman is behaving improper. So those are essentially the main two aspects. Sometimes someone just doesn't want to get into trouble. They think, oh yes, it's a pity that we can't do it that way, but oh well, I don't want to get into conflict. Maybe if I try to get more, they'll take away the little that I have, and so on. And sometimes people just don't think that something is discriminatory. They just, it goes without saying, that's how the world works. Yeah, that's normal. And, even in small things, sometimes there are differences in interpretation. It's an old feminist argument whether it is acceptable as a feminist to accept male gestures of gallantry. If a man is behaving like a classical gentleman and he wants to, open the door to a woman, be the one who pays at the restaurant, and so on, should a strong, self-sufficient feminist woman accept that or say, no? No, that, of course, is not a legal matter. That's just a matter of attitude, but there is no one correct answer to such question. Anyone else, maybe? Yelena, Abdi, you have been very quiet today. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't have any comment or question. Yeah, everything was really clear for now.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening.
Okay.
Do you hear me?
We hear you. It's breaking up a little, but generally we hear you.
Thank you. I have a suggestion. I wanted to tell the students also, we Somalis as Muslim, 99% when our father died and have daughter and son, always the son will get 75% of the wealth of the father.
Mm-hmm.
And 25% will get the daughter. Because
Yes.
always the son has more responsibility than the daughters or girls in Somalia.
Yes, and generally, if you think about the time of the appearance of Islam in the 7th century, those arrangements were actually pretty progressive for the time. Because, you know, Western countries can now say, well, we have equal inheritance, and in Muslim countries, the males always get the double share of the female. But in the 7th century, in many European laws, women could not inherit at all, or they could only inherit if they didn't have brothers and so on. And with the Quran prescribing that a daughter should always inherit just half of her brother's share, that was very, very progressive for that time.
And also, I would like to say thank you for your presentation. Well presented. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And generally, this just inspired one thing, and maybe we can finish after that. When we're talking about something that has a longer historical perspective, now, sorry, that's my professional bias as a legal historian, but it's always important to view a certain institution in the context of why was it created that way when it was created. So generally, institutions change slowly, and society and attitudes change even slower. So, you know, you can change the law today, but the consequences won't be immediately visible all over the place because people's attitudes towards that still need to change over time, and maybe they even won't change. You know, not every reform is successful. So generally, when we are talking about something that isn't really recent, we know that was introduced last year and the motivation was such and such, it's always a good idea to dig a little into the past. I'm not saying necessarily make thorough historical research into 5 centuries of the history of something, but at least some basic outlines, like why was that institution there that way in the first place? What purpose did it serve? And is it still serving that purpose? Or is it just being used due to inertia, due to customs and people thinking that's the way it is? And maybe something else would be more useful now. For example, all those inheritance customs favoring male heirs were fairly logical in generally patriarchal, but even more importantly, patrilocal societies. So where it was common when a couple gets married that the wife comes to live with the husband and not the other way around. Since daughters always went away from home to their husbands' families, particularly in rural areas, families did not want to lose land to have it divided into smaller and smaller pieces, because then eventually those small pieces of land would become unpractically small. You couldn't live off that small piece of land. So families tried to give the land to their sons, who would stay at home, who would bring their wives into the house but stay on the paternal land. while the daughters who would go away to get married, they might get dowry of similar value or a share in the inheritance or something, but that was not land. They might get, if the family was rich, they could get money, they could get jewelry, livestock, whatever other mobile things there were, but for the land to stay undivided as family property. Now, in an urban society where the largest piece of real estate a family owns is a house or an apartment, I mean the individually largest, even if they own multiple, that is not so much of a factor because obviously we won't be physically dividing the house. If multiple children inherit a parent, they will probably compensate. One will keep the house and pay the money to the others and so on. And the sex is no longer of particular importance there. But in some rural areas, it still is due to the customs still being as they were back in the day. And in some it no longer is, but it's just perpetuated because that's the way people are used to things being. Anyone else? Anything else? Okay, if not, thank you all for your attention. We can end here as we weren't taking any breaks. This is the last class that I was teaching here. I generally teach gender issues and comparative legal history if anyone picks that in the second semester. And of course, if you need any help with preparing this course or finding literature for something or something about your thesis, feel free to write to me. My email is up on the website. You who are here can, of course, come and see me in person, and so on. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you and have a good day.